Pradeep from Sydney. Wishing you a very happy good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good night to whatever it is in your part of the world. But I know for certainly that it is 11:30 p.m. in Sydney. And yes, we are looking forward to GCC episode 32. And yet again, a very, very fascinating set of speakers today and a very, very lovely session that I am myself looking forward to. As for the new format, we have 3 leaders who are speaking, and we have 3 leaders who are part of the leaders panel. Now, I'll explain to you briefly that the 3 leaders we have today are Richa Bansal from Ottawa in Canada. We've got Sandeep Sharma from Perth, and we've got Saurabh Singal from New Delhi. Now, these people will be talking about some interesting themes as well as their journey post IIT Delhi. Along with these 3 speakers, we have a panel of leaders who will be asking questions of these speakers as well as giving their perspectives on the theme that we are discussing today. The 3 people that we have on the leaders panel today are Ashok, an Indian Foreign Service officer who has been an ambassador and in senior diplomatic positions all over the world. We have Alok, he is Additional Director General, looking after broadcasting and media for a couple of ministries. And we've got Sutapa, who is the Academic Dean at Xavier's Institute for Environmental Management. Now, as a surprise, I have got one person introducing each speaker. Now, who is that person who will be introducing the speakers is actually the person who introduced me to that speaker. So let's kick off. And the gentleman that I am, I will start with the ladies and to introduce the first speaker of the day, which is Richa Bansal. I am inviting Raghu from Montreal to introduce Richa. Raghu was the first one who introduced Richa to me, and he mentioned to me that there is an interesting story over here. So over to you, Raghu, and all of us, please give a big round of applause to Richa. Richa, can you raise your hand? Raghu, please unmute yourself.
Thanks, Pradeep. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. It's a pleasure to be back again. And an honor to be introducing Richa. A bit of an unusual story here. Normally, when you're introducing a person, you're introducing somebody whom you worked with for many years, been in IIT together or worked together. In this case, none of that is true. I've never worked with Richa, and this is the first time I'm going to be speaking to her. The backstory is that I was, our senior alumni in Canada, Vijay Everly, has a small database of IIT Delhi alumni from Canada. And he and I were discussing how to, kickstart the Canada community in IIT Delhi, and it shared this list. And that's when I, came across Richa's name. And I looked at her LinkedIn profile, and honestly, I was blown away. When you think about, careers, there are 3 dimensions in which careers changes and evolves. You change industries, you change locations, you change functions. And in the case of my career, I've changed all 3 dimensions many times, sometimes 2 at a time, sometimes 3 at a time, but many people don't do that. When you look at Richa's career, and I'll just touch upon it, and I'll not steal your thunder, Pradeep, and give it back to you. I mean, you'll see from Malaysia to the US to Canada, many country changes, many industry changes, from being a lady in field engineering in the oil industry through tech, from field engineering to recruiting and recruiting strategies. And then on top of all of that, starting a social enterprise to bridge the gender gap in the C-suite with clients, both public, like the government of Canada, to private. I thought this is a very, very fascinating profile. Let me go across and have a chat with Richa. And then I thought that that will be a bit perhaps selfish of me. This will be such a great story. Let us be introduced to all IITD alumni in the GCC forum. And that's when I said that, let me, before speaking to Richa, let me first talk to Pradeep if he'd like to share in the broader forum. So I'm really excited to introduce Richa, pass the ball over to Pradeep and get a chance along with everybody else to hear Richa's story. So thanks, Pradeep.
That is such a lovely introduction, Raghu. It's been really a pleasure to have you introducing Richa. Richa, where are you?
First of all, I want to say thank you, Raghu, for introducing me to Pradeep and to this forum, actually, and for giving such a lovely introduction. Thank you so much. Pradeep, thank you for bringing me on this forum. I'm based out of Ottawa, Canada, as we speak right now. Where I will be a year from now, I don't know, but for now, I'm in Ottawa, Canada.
So let me tell you a bit about Richa, which Raghu has given you a perspective. But just imagine a young female, a young girl working at oil rigs. That very combination itself, oil rigs and women, kind of, makes me wonder. But the story just begins over there. So for listening to the story, so Richa, tell us, you finished IIT Delhi in 2009. What happened after that?
Pradeep, I lost you for a second there. Could you repeat what you were saying?
So what I was saying was that you finished IIT Delhi in 2009. What happened after that?
Ever since I graduated in 2009 with a bachelor's in mechanical engineering. And for perspective, I was the only woman in the batch of 68, 69 in mechanical engineering when I first entered IIT Delhi 2005. And then one other of our colleagues, she decided to join mechanical engineering. So she moved from I can't remember which branch, but she moved into mechanical engineering. So we were two women. So when I graduated, I really was fascinated by the 24/7 lifestyle of Schlumberger. And my husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, he had done an internship at Schlumberger and he got a full-time job with Schlumberger. So I was adamant and set to work with Schlumberger. But unfortunately, Schlumberger did not give me a job. So I came here to US to do my master's in mechanical engineering at Purdue University. And I again applied to Schlumberger. I was like, I want to work for you. And they did not want to give me a job in field engineering. So they hired me for the tech center. 2 months of internship at tech center. They offered me a job in the tech center. I said, no, I want to go work for you in the field. So at that point, they had to succumb and give me a job as a field engineer. So 2011, I graduated with my master's as a field engineer. I started my career in Malaysia. So for a year and a half, I used to work on offshore oil rigs in deep water, South China Sea. Oftentimes finding myself as the only woman on the oil rig. I remember one instance when I had to go by a supply boat for like a 48-hour journey to the oil rig. And on the supply boat, I was told, you should lock your doors because we've never had women on board. And I reached the drill ship and they said, go back. We don't need women here. We have no place for women. So it was that moments like this when you had to really stand strong and said, no, I belong here. I'm sent here for a reason. I know how to do my job. And you stay strong and you prove yourself that, I belong here. I'm as good as you are, maybe sometimes even better. So that's my starting point of my career. And then I moved 2013, moved to States. Since then, I've worked in several functions. Every 2 years, essentially, I moved job roles, job functions. I came as a mechanical engineer, promoted to a senior mechanical engineer. Then for a couple of years, I decided to move to supply chain. So I was a supply chain manager. Then I moved in manufacturing, growing product lines at Schlumberger. Again, myself and my mentor at the time were the only two female managers in that center of about 1,000 people. And it was back in 2019 where I started to go through my, quarter life crisis. Like, what am I doing here? What's my purpose what's my purpose? Why do I get up in the morning? And I decided that, my purpose is to elevate other women in leadership. So what I faced, other women should have less of a challenge if they find themselves as the only women in the room. And that's where Pink Careers started from. That's my social enterprise. As Raghu mentioned, the mission is to close the gender gap in the C-suite. We do career coaching, we do leadership training and development programs, focusing on emerging women leaders. So women who are earlier in their careers, they're first starting to step into people manager roles, and learning how to find their voice at the table and find that seat on the table.
So one question at this stage, Richa, was the romance before the Schlumberger job, or was the job before the romance?
Job before, I think it has been kind of hand in hand, really. Couldn't have been one other than the other, but romance started before the job. And then romance and job kind of intertwined, has continued ever since.
And the romance continued when you were looking after, or you were the only female among thousands of engineers over there. I mean, how did it feel?
Romance continued for 5 years of long distance, survived 5 years of long distance before we were reunited. So it's been a heck of a journey there too.
So tell me, you are now at Amazon.
Yeah.
You are into e-commerce. What has e-commerce got to do with oil rigs?
I think e-commerce doesn't have a lot to do with oil rigs, but the foundational skills that enable you to succeed in e-commerce, tech, or frankly, any other job has everything to do with what Schlumberger made me working on the oil rigs, right? So skills that I gained around confidence in myself, owning my voice, understanding the skills of leading people, negotiation, stakeholder management, working up and down across, all of those skills are relevant across the board, regardless of which industry you go to. So yeah, oil and rigs.
So here again,
yeah.
I don't want to steal your thunder, but the question is, you see, you and I understand that skills are transferable. But how do you convince the other party that yes, skills are transferable and you are the right person in a totally different new area?
Yeah, like that's a great question. I think the other person would not automatically know, the other company would not automatically know that you're the right person, especially if you're coming out of a completely different industry. And I get this question all the time. Like, there's so many people now trying to move from the oil and gas industry to technology. And what I tell them is that you got to show them that you have transferable skills. And one very tactical, tangible way you can do that is you go through the job descriptions that you are interested in now. So I'm going to just take my own example. Okay. So I was interested to work with Amazon or other big tech in a program management role, because, that is the transferable kind of job code that I had with oil and gas to program management here in Amazon. So I went through job descriptions of several, what do product managers do? What do program managers do? And you would find that all of them also work with customers, understand product requirements. They understand the customer, like the stakeholder management. They negotiate with different teams. All of those skills you may have already gained along your journey in this totally disparate industry. So you use those cues that you get from the job description and you update your resume, you update your LinkedIn profile, you put out comments and posts that showcase your skills.
See, today,
to show that you have those transferable
today
skills.
You are speaking very confidently. You are telling us, what you should be doing and what you did. But at the time that you were in the process of reinventing yourself, what was your mental state? Were you getting knockbacks? Or it was just hunky-dory, wherever you went and you said, look, I've got transferable skills. And they said, come, walk in.
My mental state in the last 2 years have also gone up and down with how the job market has gone up and down. Raghu touched upon, we moved countries, we moved industries. At one point, we left both of our jobs. We basically lost our jobs at the same time. My husband lost his job. I kind of quit a month later, and we moved our small children, 2 under the age of 4, to a completely new country, trying to find new jobs. So you're right. My mental state goes up and down. And then every day, I try to remind myself whenever my mental state went down, that tomorrow is a new day to try again and put myself out there again. Because if I don't put myself out there, and then nothing will happen. Okay. So yes, I can speak confidently now because everything is great in retrospective, right? But at the time, I did go up and down in my mental state, but then you have to continue reminding yourself, like you are the only one who can do that, that, hey, tomorrow will be a new day. You got to still put yourself out there. You got to still apply, learn from that. Maybe you do 20 applications, 18 you don't hear back, 19 you don't hear back, but you only need one yes to move forward.
Now, Amazon is known for having a very arduous selection process. They don't have one interview, they have multiple interviews.
They have many interviews.
So, how did you kind of, go through the entire process of multiple rounds of interview and still kind of keeping your steam? Would love to hear that.
Yeah, a few things help me. So there's plenty of resources that are available online for people who are learning, who want to, move jobs, move industries, or who want to learn about specific interview process for these big tech. And everybody has their own, special process of interviewing. So Amazon process is completely different from Google to Facebook. So you can lean on those skills, lean on those resources. And I did too. But I would say the other resource that really helped me was to connect with my friends who were already working with Amazon, who had just gotten a job at Amazon, and asking them how their process went. And one of my close friends actually shared all of his examples and the way he has prepped for the Amazon interview. And I used that as a blueprint to write my own examples, to write my own stories, write my own narrative. And I pestered him, can you please do mock with me, right? And so I hadn't interviewed in 10 years. So I need to practice. And we will find, I found many of my other friends who are trying to move to Amazon or other places as well, haven't interviewed in 10 years, 15 years. You got to practice, right? And the first time that interview the mock that I did was really bad. But the second time was a little bit better. The third time was even better. And then finally, I think I did a good job. That's why I'm here at Amazon.
Okay, so let's go on another tack. Pink Careers. That's an initiative that you formed, which is focused on inclusion, on DEI, which is focused on, helping women in their jobs and in their careers. And I believe it has already touched 6 figures. So my first question is, what are you doing with all that money? The 6 figures that you're making and everything,
Yeah, we actually, I think I was just calculating, we just hit 6 figures in the business. Honestly, so far it's just sitting in the bank doing nothing with it. I haven't had time to think about it.
So what made you start that? When did you start that? And how was the journey in building it up to 6 figures?
Yeah, so I'll start from here. It's a social enterprise, but it's a for-profit company. Okay. And then sometimes people ask me, oh, are you a non-profit company? And I say no. And then part of the reason why I formed it as a for-profit company was the inspiration that I got from Katie Menard, who is the CEO of Pink Petro, now called Ally. So she was the one who started this first social enterprise organization for the oil and gas industry to promote women in oil and gas. And she used to say that a business can be both, can have both a mission that's strong and close to your heart and can make money, because making money is a good thing. Okay. And nothing goes wrong when women make more money. That's another one of my mentors who say that. And so for that reason, I started as a for-profit company. So you're right. Like, we have some money sitting in the bank. I haven't thought much about what I'll do with it, but a couple of thoughts that I have. One is I want to give it back in some form or fashion to promote other women, either through scholarships. So part of it, through scholarships to some of our programs, would want to spend some of that money there, some of the money on scaling the business. So as I think about how I can scale the business beyond it needing me, because I have a full-time job and I really enjoy being in the corporate. So I want to continue doing that. So then how do I scale the business without it needing me full-time? That's the other piece. And the third, venture funding. So I haven't really raised venture funding ever yet, but women I know has miserable statistics for venture funding, less than 2% women are able to raise capital. So at some point I want to have a venture arm out of the capital that we are building so that we can support, mission-based companies that are run by or majority owned by women. So those are some thoughts, but nothing concrete.
There is a lot more that I want to ask you, Richa, but I also have 3 leaders. And I will ask the leaders to put Richa on the spot. Let's kickstart the first one and let's get one lady talking to another lady. So Sutapa, over to you. What perspectives or questions do you have for Richa?
Hi, Richa. Firstly, very inspiring story. So, even mechanical engineering long back with the stint in Tata Motors and Maruti, so could relate so well with what you were saying. Really inspiring journey. My question is, as an academician, especially in the sustainability domain, you see in India this year, SEBI passed the ESG, the mandate which is going to come for the 1,000 companies. We see, especially for strategic apex, very few women, especially with the tech and manufacturing firms going to the top leadership. My question to you is, how do you see that panning? Is the ecosystem organically ready, or do you think these kind of mandates help women get more representative, especially in tech and manufacturing companies?
I think we're getting better. In terms of organic growth of women in the tech industry, the manufacturing industries, or the energy industries in general that have been traditionally male dominated. But I think just organic growth is not sufficient. And so I think, I can't remember the exact statistic, but it was something of the order, it's going to take 200 years plus to get parity if you just let the organic growth be for supporting women and others who identify as women in these manufacturing and other tech heavy industries. So I think mandates, top-down mandates, where there is real movement, where there is real resources being provided to support women and to bring that equity among, so provide equitable sort of resources for women and male. And some examples of that would be to support, equal maternity, paternity leaves, like as simple as that, allow women to see that if this is a place that they enjoy being, because they are intellectually, mentally challenged, this is where they see themselves grow. All of these other measures, the top-down approaches do help. And I think just we are not ready we're not ready to only have organic growth support the gender parity in these industries.
So, thank you so much. Yeah. Yes, Richa.
Okay, so from Sutapa, we go across to Ashok. Ashok, what questions or perspectives do you have in regard to Richa? And Ashok, you may need to unmute yourself.
Firstly, thank you, Pradeep. I'm sorry that you're seeing the name Dr. V. Ranjan. That is my brother's name because I'm sitting in Pune where my mother is currently in hospital.
I thought it is possibly your avatar, but that's all right.
No, it's not an alias. So this is me from Pune instead of from Bombay. But thank you. And Richa, it was great hearing your story. Very impressive. And of course, we see it as a great encouragement to people, to women, and not only women, to others also who are aspiring to move in these directions. I understand perfectly well that when you moved from Schlumberger, from oil to e-commerce, there would be a lot of people who would ask you, how did you shift? I'm not surprised because that was the first question they asked me when I moved from engineering to diplomacy. So my question to you is, since today we are also talking about carbon capture and similar activities, how do you see your company working towards helping the process of reducing carbon in the course of carrying out e-commerce and other activities that you do?
I think one of the biggest ways that Amazon and other big tech can support sustainable energy, and especially for Amazon, is through their AWS business, right? And so AWS, the Microsoft, this Microsoft suite, Google suite, they're all backbones for large enterprises, consume a lot of power. They have a lot of big data centers, a lot of power requirements. So they can do their job and to some extent, I know that Amazon is, and so are the other big tech. That's where I think they can have a biggest impact on managing their data, their energy needs, to have a more sustainable, environment around them. So,
and that makes a lot of sense, purely because data centers and infrastructure consume a lot of energy. And that is one of the areas which is currently being targeted for making it much more cleaner. So back to you, Ashok.
No, I would just add that, yes, energy reduction in data is one area. You could also perhaps look at, because e-commerce will also involve delivery. So whether the transportation system would then act into this process.
Yeah, there's a lot of work going on, like in the middle mile and the last mile, like understanding of middle mile and last mile journey and optimizing that. And so there's a lot of impact that especially large e-commerce companies like Walmart, Amazon, they can have, or supply chain companies can have a huge impact. That's
How far do you see these initiatives coming back to India?
I mean, they will, like, India, China, they're like the biggest markets around. So to large extent, I mean, they will come to India in some form or fashion there.
Thank you.
So at one of the next sessions, when I have you, Ashok, I'm going to ask you that when you joined IFS, what was the male to female ratio? But for another session. From Ashok, we move across to Alok. So it is A to A. Alok,
okay, hi.
How are you?
Hi.
Over to you.
Yeah, I'm great. Doing great. So, can you hear me? My voice is clear?
Yep.
Absolutely.
Okay, hi. So, Richa, it's truly, truly an amazing story. And like, my wife, who, who's an ecologist, she has made also transformation, not from sort of, such stark sort of, changes that you have sort of undertaken. But, I mean, it was quite motivating to sort of, listen to your story. What I was sort of, you are working with Amazon, and, what we are doing in India is something different. Like, looking at it from a different perspective, that all these big e-commerce retails have sort of mom and pop stores, like those kirana stores on the corners, they have been affected badly, and probably COVID amplified this kind of asymmetry, because e-commerce companies' profits zoomed, and some of these stores closed down. Now, what the government of India is doing is something very interesting, and I would sort of request you to sort of look into that, because based on the same kind of thing like UPI was, Unified Payment Interface, on which everything sort of comes in, payment gateways come in. We have now an initiative called ONDC. You must have probably heard, it's Open Network for Digital Commerce. It's like it's a like you have Amazon, which is a closed platform, which sort of may lack transparencies. There may be sort of commission charge or preferential treatment given, but what the government will try to promote is that bringing that open sort of kind of protocols, open platform, where all the value chain in terms of buyers, sellers, logistic companies, all of them can come together and then can connect to sort of each other, so as to democratize this space, so that large companies are not able to sort of claim super profits. Now, I would like to know your opinion if you have heard of it, because a trial run has already been done in 5 cities. 7 companies have already hopped onto this ONDC platform, and government is pushing it in a big way, bringing even the whole agri value chain. In fact, yesterday, Commerce and Industry Minister sort of launched a hackathon where the whole of the ONDC has collaborated with NABARD, which is the for agriculture a refinance government company, and where sort of they are bringing all the whole of the agriculture value chain also in the ONDC platform. How do you see it? Because I mean, Amazon is too big a kind of giant company, but how do you see that open networks, open kind of platforms versus the kind of closed platforms that some of these e-commerce companies have sort of gone about?
Yeah, so I can't speak for Amazon per se, but I think this idea of ONDC is quite empowering, right? And as you said, there is a huge, like India, the way India works. There's all of these mom and pop shops, and similar to like, not want to say like similar to Canada, but here also there's a lot of like small businesses. A lot of power is with small businesses as opposed to large businesses. And especially in India, like as you said, lots of like these little kirana shops that traditionally, like even now, they don't have a way to go online. So it's there's just it's so much ripe for opportunity. And there's some companies are coming up in this space where they're doing that front end work, similar to Shopify. There's a company in India as well that just works on helping these mom and shops connect and go online, right? Like imagine their visibility, that how much visibility increases once they go online. And then if they become part of this ONDC, then there is automatic like network that they can leverage around connecting with e-commerce, connecting with like payment system, and we have these phone pay and all of these, then connecting with these delivery companies that are working on the last mile,
delivery company,
like Swiggy and all of these others. And so I think it's a huge opportunity for both companies as well as the companies who can provide solutions to all of these mom and pop shops, and huge opportunities for mom and pop shops to do bigger, to be visible. So I think in general, it's a good thing.
And Alok, I must say that, you see, when I read sitting in Australia about ONDC, I really get amazed, because this is really transformational in nature, looking at the current ecosystem. And I hope and pray that it kind of takes off, because this is something what the country needs. But anyway,
that's right.
Back to you, Alok. Anything else that you would like to ask?
No. I mean, it's going to be initiative same on the way, UPI kicked off, and sort of transformed those small businesses. The same is going to, your ONDC is going to do. And government is fairly committed to this idea and pushing it pretty fast.
Yes, and I think in one of the future sessions, we will focus also on ONDC, because it's a very important theme. So with that, Richa, it's been absolutely lovely to have this session with you. And, looking at what you have done to yourself, I will be also inviting you in one of the future sessions to come on board as the leaders panel. And also to mention to everybody who has spoken at GCC that I am going to kickstart work on a book which is going to capture, all these interviews in a standardized format. But the thing about the book is that I am going to get it augmented reality, focus onto that. So I want to make it something different, but these are early days. So with that, please give a big round of applause to Richa, to Raghu for the introduction, and to our three leaders. And let's go across from Ottawa to where else but to Australia, to my home ground, and to Perth.
Thank you, Pradeep. Thank you for inviting me to speak.
Yeah, it was lovely to have you. And don't get lost. We will, grab you once again for GCC. And grab your husband also. Grab your husband also,
You know where to find me.
Yes. So now over to Perth, and to introduce Sandeep, whom else but Tirlochan Shastri. Now, Tirlochan is a household name in India. And when I say household, it doesn't mean that, every Tom, Dick, and Harry knows Tirlochan, but the right people know the kind of work that he is doing. Needless to say that at the moment, he is one of the architects of the RTI movement in India. And a whole lot of other stuff that he keeps doing. He's building up cooperatives in the agriculture sector. And he was the one who introduced me to Sandeep. And why and how? Because the two of them were roommates in IIT Delhi. So with that, please give a big welcome to Tirlochan. And Tirlochan, please introduce Sandeep.
Thank you, Pradeep ji. First of all, big thanks to Richa for the wonderful talk that she gave. It's a pleasure and a joy to, of course, introduce Sandeep. But how do you introduce somebody who you know so well for 40 years? So very briefly, Sandeep comes from an army family in Delhi. I mean, not in Delhi, in India. And his father was all over the place in different places. And we went to school together for 2 years, Sandeep and I, and we ended up as roommates in IIT Delhi. I'll just mention a few things which, due to modesty, Sandeep may or may not mention. And we are looking forward to listening to his new role or new avatar on carbon credits. I'm very keenly waiting to hear about that. So Sandeep was one of the toppers. I mean, he back then, what computer science stands for today used to be electrical engineering. So he was one of the toppers in the JEE. So he got into electrical engineering, and he passed out with something like 9.5. Sandeep, I'm sorry if I got your GPA a little lower than it was, but that was not, he was not a Maggu as we used to call them in those days. He was also in the badminton team. Perhaps he was the badminton captain, and he was a very popular guy in the hostel and in the department and around IIT, and an extremely successful guy. And one of the things that when we graduated was that, you know, there was this dream job called Schlumberger, same place where Richa went. And they used to hire 2 or 3 people from the entire batch. So people like me who out of sheer cowardice didn't even apply for Schlumberger. So Sandeep was one of the 2-3 guys who actually made it to Schlumberger. And he has had international experience in every continent in the world. If he has not had experience in Schlumberger with Africa, I can only say that he climbed Mount Kilimanjaro at the ripe old age of 57 or 58 or something like that. So he's a very active guy, and he continues to be physically fit. Now, 2-3 things I will mention about him which stand out. One is that he is a rock steady guy and very steady. I won't say that he's very disciplined. He is disciplined, but you know, very steady person, which is something that we all used to admire. And he was very dutiful to his parents. He actually made a bit of a compromise with his career to care for his parents, and particularly his mother, who was unwell at that time. The other thing when I say steady is that he's the only guy I know so far who stuck to one company all his life before he decided to call it quits. That was Schlumberger. So he did very well there, and he did not jump ship here and there. The other thing I would like to mention is that he's a very strong family man. Of course, he's a grandfather with a few grandchildren. He will tell us about it. But, you know, he and his family and his wife's family also, they come originally from rural Uttar Pradesh. They have actually taken up a very significant project for school education and children. And once I had the privilege of going with Sandeep to see that. So he's putting his heart and soul into it. And in spite of staying in Australia, he makes frequent trips to India. And he's done a lot for the kids I don't remember the name of the village, but I know it is near Hathras, which is near Mathura. So he's well, it's a little bit of a cliche, but he's kind of a Renaissance guy who's multidimensional, you know. He's got a good heart, he's got a good brain, he's good at sports, and at the ripe old age of 55 or something, I don't know what, he actually got himself a PhD.
Oh, and I wasn't aware of that. Okay.
Yeah, he has a PhD. He's now Dr. Sandeep Sharma. So he's going to tell us about why he did a PhD and what his new innings are on carbon credits. And my apologies to Sandeep if I have missed anything significant or if I've said something which you don't approve of. So Sandeep, over to you, and really look forward to your talk.
Thank you so much, Tarlochan. And before I hand it over to Sandeep, I do want to acknowledge that who introduced me to Tarlochan? Sunil Mishra.
He's there.
Yeah, Sunil, can you raise your hand, please? And this is how the network is working. No, that this is we are simply exploding at this particular point in time. So Over to you, Sandeep, and let's hear your story and what you've been doing and all this. I wasn't aware of, the doctor also, and I wasn't aware of your trips to all these mountains and all that. But let's see what happened after you finished IIT Delhi.
Thank you, Pradeep. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Absolutely, loud and clear.
Okay. So thank you for the opportunity to be on this platform. And before I start, firstly, I'd like to thank Richa for her comments and actually congratulate her for something. She's sort of taken all of those challenges in her stride. And well done, Richa. And wish you all the success in the future. So my journey began in 1981 with Schlumberger, and that's 28 odd years before Richa's. And there were some things which were very different and some things which were probably similar. The difference was that, at that stage, India was closed and we had just, it was a different time, and people either went to IIM, tried to work for an MNC, or went overseas to do a master's in PhD. So that's pretty much the route I took as well. I applied, had some options overseas. But then when I got the Schlumberger opportunity, I said, look, let's give it a try for a couple of years, make some money, and then hopefully it'll make the journey of the PhD and master's or master's PhD a bit easier. So that never happened, and I stayed with Schlumberger a long time. But Schlumberger actually, and Richa also mentioned that, it actually is a company ahead of its time, in the sense that even in the early 80s, it was very clear that people got paid the same amount for the same job, which was very different for companies like Shell and others in the oil and gas industry, wherein you got two components to your salary. One component, which was sort of a domestic component, which everybody got the same, but then one component was based on where you actually came from. Right, so that was different. A Swiss guy got more than a British guy, and a British guy got a lot more than an English guy, than an Indian person. So it was kind of, Schlumberger was ahead of its time in that, and everybody was the same as long as you were doing the same job. So it was, a meritocracy in that respect, and anybody could aspire to a bigger job, a promotion. It was just a matter of how you performed. So I worked in many, many places. I think we lived in about 10 or 12 different countries. Every couple of years we were moving. And interestingly, for the first 10 years, this is before Google search. So for the first 10 years, neither my parents nor my wife's parent could actually see where we were on a globe, or on an atlas. They were very small places, because oil and gas typically, the field operations were out of small places, and we loved it. And I must acknowledge that it was all possible because my wife was very supportive. And, she wasn't complaining of being in a small place. And, while the kids were small, it didn't matter from an education perspective. But overall, without that support, it wouldn't have been possible. So that continued for many years. And, till we landed up, I think, in Paris or in Cairo, one of those places when actually everybody could see us as, yeah, we know where that is. So that was an interesting part of the journey. But, on Schlumberger, the other thing was it was empowering. Yeah, the company gave you a lot of opportunities at a relatively young age. You had autonomy, you had the options to take decisions, and you were held accountable and responsible for your decisions. So I think these are good grooming practices, and I can appreciate what Richa also said, that they do give you confidence. They give you a sense that, look, once you set a target for yourself, you can achieve it. And the other beauty of it was that, honestly, one reason why I didn't think of changing is because in Schlumberger, I was fortunate enough not to do the same job twice for the first 20, 25 years. Every job had a different facet to it. Not only the geography, but the approach, the type of work, whether you were in marketing, in product development, in engineering, in sales, in field operations, in line management, whichever role was there, it had a different dimension to it. And that, again, was part of the reason why you felt you were constantly learning, constantly moving ahead based on, new knowledge in a different environment. So no reason to move when you're having a lot of fun, right? So I think all of that contributed to the point where when I had an opportunity to come to Australia, and that again was interesting. It was not destined, or it was destined, but it was not planned meticulously, if I may say so. In '98, we were in Indonesia. I was running a Schlumberger business for the Far East. And there was a coup in Indonesia, for those who might remember. The Suharto government was overthrown. And there was a lot of uncertainty with regards to, schooling. And my wife read me the Riot Act saying, look, you've got to get your act together, because if something happens with schooling, what do you do? So we tried getting admission in Singapore at that time for our kids, and it was difficult, right? Because on Indian passports at that stage in Singapore, they were not accommodating unless you had a Singapore work permit, which we didn't have. We had Indonesian work permits. So to cut a long story short, Australia was within my area of responsibility. We visited Perth. We were fortunate to get admission for both the kids, and the family moved on the back end of '99. While I stayed on in Indonesia. So I did a few stints in Indonesia, Malaysia, till about 2004. And in 2005, or back end of 2004, I had the opportunity to come back and work in carbon sequestration. So I knew a little bit about it because the chief scientist of Schlumberger at that time was a big proponent. He was a guy called Philippe Lacourgaille. And Philippe, he was a sort of a very erudite Frenchman who said, look, all of this will come one day and bite us. We have all these carbon dioxide accumulations in the air, and we have to be very serious about it and find solutions. And the oil and gas industry, with the skills that we have and the knowledge we have of the subsurface, we can find a solution. To put that a little bit in context, the oil and gas industry produces roughly 100 million barrels of oil and gas every day. And we use it in a variety of industries, from petrochemicals to automobiles and airlines and all the rest. But to produce those 100 million barrels, you inject 3 times that volume, right? So you inject water, you inject gas, you inject all sorts of chemicals, right? To try and maximize the production that you can get from these fields. So the industry has a very good understanding of not only production, and extracting fluids, but also injecting fluids in particular reservoirs and keeping them there, or at least directing them in a very well understood fashion. Now, when you get into carbon sequestration, that's really what it's all about, to find the right reservoirs where you can store carbon dioxide in very large volumes. Now, again, people talk in general terms that, look, you can grow trees, you can, have other means of trying to reduce carbon from the atmosphere. So let me give you some notional numbers, right? So if you've got a hectare of trees, you plant a hectare of trees, you take up between 10 and 20 tons a year, right? So if you look at all the IEA projections, and if we want to get to the 1.5, or forget the 1.5, even the 2 degrees target by 2050, right? You need to take out something like 30 gigatons from the atmosphere. That is a huge, huge amount of carbon dioxide that needs to be removed. Now, again, to put some context around what is a gigaton of carbon dioxide, right? Somebody did the math, and it's the weight of 5.4 billion people. If each person weighed like one of these big American, American football backs. So these are huge guys, right? 6 feet 6 inches tall, probably 250 kilos in weight. So it's a weight of 5.4 billion people if each weighed that much. So it is a very significant amount. And trees, while helping, are just not going to be enough. In other words, we need to look at a portfolio of solutions, and we can't really knock any solution back because all of those contribute to eliminating or reducing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So when I had this opportunity to come and work in sequestration, it was on secondment to an organization called the Cooperative Research Center for Greenhouse Gas Technologies out of Canberra. So while I was still based in Perth, the project was in Melbourne, the head office was in Canberra, and it was a very interesting opportunity. The CRC is a very uniquely Australian beast, wherein the government puts out let's say, for lack of a better word, a notional tender, saying that, look, this is an area of interest, come up with some proposals. And people who want to put that forward, put up a proposal saying, look, we will do this, this, and this. And normally it's a combination of a few people with some backing from universities and CSIRO, which is like the national lab in Australia. And that's what happened in this case. The Cooperative Research Center for Greenhouse Gas Technologies got funded for 7 years with some federal government funding. And then it went on to get industry partners. Each of those industry partners contributed certain subscriptions, which allowed projects to work. We then looked at proving the concept of CCS, or carbon capture and storage, in Victoria in the first project, and I was the program manager for that, wherein we built a small plant. We captured the carbon dioxide and we injected it in an underground depleted gas field. It was a small volume, relatively 65,000 tons. We did that over a year. And not only that, we actually monitored it to show that, look, the CO2 was staying where we put it, and we understood how it was behaving. The models were predictive and they were correct, or within reason they were correct. Because with geological models, you've got to understand that all models are wrong. Some models are useful, right? You can't see what's in the earth. You just have to infer that based on data and then build lots of models to try and arrive at probabilistic estimates of, what is the most likely case, how bad it could be or how good it could be, right? So you work in an uncertain space. So we as an industry, the oil and gas industry, is very good at working with uncertainty, right? I mean, there's a lot of effort which is put in to try and consolidate that, understand what the key drivers of the uncertainty are and how to improve that. So bottom line, CCS works, and since then there's been a lot of projects that are at various stages. The progress hasn't been as much as we'd like because we had the GFC in between. There was an Australian government, Tony Abbott, when he became Prime Minister, he basically got in to try and get rid of the carbon price, which was put in by the previous government. And since then, we haven't really had any financial incentives. So today, if you look at around the world, carbon capture and storage has got a second lease of life in North America, where there's a 45Q tax benefit of $50 a ton for companies that can show that they are injecting CO2 and preventing it from leaking into the atmosphere. The European Union is pushing it quite a bit, and the European Union carbon price is around 80 odd euros a ton. Australia is still without a carbon price. They have one sort of pseudo carbon price meant for farming initiatives, which is around the 30 odd Australian dollars a ton. But now that it's happening in North America and in Europe, it's going to move here as well. So when I was leaving, when I had finished the project in Victoria, Schlumberger at that stage, we were still looking at opportunities to try and grow the business. So from about 2009, we started to develop a strong business for CCS in Australia. And that was going really well till about 2010, 11, when once the carbon price disappeared, the bottom fell out of the market. And following the GFC and the recovery of the GFC, there was really no money going in towards environmental efforts. I had a team at that stage, and we had to make a decision. I couldn't see a career path for them. So I made a recommendation to my president saying, look, I think we've got to close this down. And he accepted that. And then we moved all the people, whoever wanted to different parts of the company so that their careers could continue. So that left what happens to me. And I was given an opportunity to go to headquarters in the States. And I really didn't want to move at that stage. So it was a very happy departure. Became a consultant. And since then, I've been working in CCS with different organizations and trying to give some direction to carbon capture and storage. Of late, have teamed up with a bunch of young people, Richard's age and others, people with investment banking backgrounds who are now looking at getting, a special purpose vehicle set up so that we can get funding from interested, private equity or banks to try and actually get some assets where we can develop projects and have offtake agreements with people who have CO2 and who really don't want to develop a business of getting rid of CO2. So companies that, for example, use gas to create hydrogen and then ammonia. So fertilizer company agreements, or finding somebody who can take care of their CO2 solutions or provide a solution to their CO2. So that, in a nutshell, is the journey from traditional.
There is a lot to discuss with you, but I have to hand it over to the leaders panel. But before I do that, if you need any help with managing those billions of dollars that Schlumberger gave you, I'm there to help you. Okay. But jokes apart, I will now hand it over to the leaders panel, and this time I will go in the reverse order. Alok, it's you who will kickstart, your questions and or perspectives on Sandeep.
Okay. So, I mean, I found this to be a, really sort of, a great journey. And the way, you were able to, the way you talked about that, your family was able to adjust to those small towns. And I mean, I was really impressed, like Sandeep, I must say. And something that you hopped on to CCS, and then you developed interest out there. What I wanted to really talk about is that, countries like India, where the vehicle penetration has been sort of less, and they have this advantage of leapfrogging. So Sandeep, although it's it would be a EV would be a electric vehicle mobility would be a new area. How do you see India as leapfrogging into sort of better or greater adoption of EVs? So that's what would be that's a perspective, because having seen that sort of the whole of in the oil and gas industry. How do you see its future, and especially in the light of adoption of EVs?
That's a wonderful question, Alok. Over to you, Sandeep.
Yeah, look, Alok, I think you're exactly correct. There is a very structural direction in terms of moving with EVs, and I think it's going to happen, right? So the question is how fast we can transition, right? And EVs is one facet, power generation with renewables, and other forms of dispatchable power is another, right? And I think the question is not so much in my mind of whether it'll happen or not, but the question is, when will this transition, and how can this transition be planned? So one of the areas where I have a little bit of concern is that a lot of people, especially, because it's popular to have higher targets, whether it's a 40% reduction, 60% reduction, or we'll go, 60% renewables. That's all fine. But the moment you start having issues with dispatchability, then you have a problem, as we've seen last year in Europe, as we've seen with the crisis with the Russian gas, and Germany and countries like that having to go back and revert back to old lignite-based power stations, right? So I think that transition needs to be thought through. So JP Morgan actually did quite a bit of research on this as well. And it was a very interesting report wherein they said that, look, if you want to take hydrogen, for example, right? If you want to take hydrogen as an energy source and develop it to replace gas, right? And actually have green hydrogen down the line, then by 2050, the amount of energy you will need to generate green hydrogen will be like 8 terawatt hours, right? Which is 4 times the renewable energy that we have today, right? So how quickly can we develop this renewable energy? And this is just for hydrogen, right? Now, if you look at lithium, right? We're looking at scaling up lithium by ×7 to ×10, EVs by ×10, right? How quickly can we get these manufacturing lines up? I mean, we are going to be looking at, for lithium, they worked out that you would need, for batteries, you would need 20 gigafactories, right? Each factory being 35 gigawatt hours plus, 20 gigafactories a year for 10 years. So there's a lot of discussion, there's a lot of talking, and the investment that's going to be required for this will be in trillions of dollars, right? So where is it happening? My concern is that I think there is a gap between aspiration and between action. And unfortunately, because of the rhetoric around all of this and the fact that oil and gas has been tarnished, saying that, look, you're the polluters, right? Investment in the oil and gas sector has declined. If you look at a very, very simple math here, a traditional oil field declines 6 to 7% per annum, right? It's a natural decline once you're producing from it, right? And if you're not investing back in it, then these fields will decline and you will not have enough production to meet, dispatchability for gas-fired power stations, or you will have crisis for petrol till you've got the EV switch. So my hope and I guess wish is that there is a little bit more focus given on a more robust transition plan so that enough investment goes into keeping this form of energy going till such time that something else is able to take over that. But for EVs, you're spot on, it'll happen. The only question is how soon, because even when EVs come in or all new vehicles are EVs, there's still going to be an installed base of very many old vehicles, which will still require fossil fuels.
Excellent, Sandeep. And I was only reading yesterday an article that for India's conversion to the green economy, an investment of $327 billion, And the same question being asked as to where is this money going to be coming from and, how soon kind of a thing. And at the same time, how do you prolong the life of the fossil fuels while the transition happens, especially when you've seen what has happened as a result of the Ukraine war. So excellent. And now we move across from Alok to Ashok. Ashok, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sandeep. This was a fascinating account, not only of your personal life, but also of the statistics and the facts and figures you gave about the oil industry, and particularly the degree of difficulty which people are going to face in trying to move away from oil to other fuels. But, and forget the name of the organization, there must be many of them, but a couple of them which I think are based in Australia and US, which are engaged in this multi-directional control of carbon. So the decarbonization as it's seen by these organizations does not, if you take only one factor like EVs or one factor like steel industry or even plantation of trees, you're not going to get very far, as you pointed out yourself. But it has to be something where you do it in parallel with about 15, 20, maybe even 50, 60 sectors. So you will have to cover sectors which are like as different as steel and cement, construction, fertilizer, and change of fuels. So when you talk of not only moving away from oil to EV, but also oil to maybe biofuels. I know there's a lot of controversy over biofuels, but at least we will be trying to compensate by planting and then burning. And also things like algae and so on, which today are still in the beta stage or something like that, but have not yet reached a thing. We keep hearing about planes flying on algae fuel, but it doesn't seem to go beyond that. But these are the areas, because things like algae may be the only thing which will give you the kinds of volume which you are trying to see for displacing the oil volumes which you are currently producing. So do you see a situation? Firstly, you will need vast amounts of money. And this has been brought out even in the course of the carbon talks and this COP, the latest COP and the one before that, where they tried to say that the richer countries have to give large amounts of money. 100 billion was the original one, but the figure today that we are looking at should be something in the trillions. Even my Prime Minister Modi has said it should be in the trillions. And we do need that kind of figure. Nobody in the West, and when I say West, I include Australia, is even mildly focused on trying to increase the amount of money that they're going to give for this adaptation, mitigation, and change to a different series. And at the same time, you get these pundits who talk about direct carbon capture, which you and I know, if they start putting out these fans and sucking in carbon and putting amines or calcium hydroxide to absorb the carbon dioxide, you're going to have about 1 million of their machines, which will never work. It will be worse than the figures you gave for EVs and for the other things. So do you see a situation where at least the richer countries or the richer companies, maybe through corporate social responsibility systems or some other systems, can get together, and particularly the big sinners like cement, steel, and so on, and then moving away to something like ammonia, for example, instead of fossil fuel. Do you see something like that happening, or is it just a wishful thinking? And in any case, you and I are over 60, so it doesn't matter now very much what happens to the other. How do you see it?
So I think, Ashok, you hit it on the head that there is not going to be one magic silver bullet. There is no single solution. There has to be a portfolio of options, and the portfolio mix will vary depending on where that particular solution is being applied. Because there are certain geographies where carbon capture and storage may have, because of the geology, a certain application, whereas if you try then do that on land in central India, where you've got the Deccan Plateau, then it may not be as successful, right? So I think you're exactly correct there. Now, money is a real issue because the price on carbon is not adequate for private industry to actually put a lot of effort in it, right? So the oil and gas companies are now starting to do it because they have some benefits, like the 45Q in America, which is propelling them to act in there, and in Europe, where with an 80 euro carbon price, they can still, if not make a lot of money, they can at least break even or be close to that if they look at depleted fields or reusing a lot of the infrastructure that exists here, right? But then when you start looking at other countries where fundamentally, energy is still in a crisis mode, whether it's Africa, or even trying to electrify all our villages in India and make sure that people can use that energy, I think we are a long way away. And to be honest, I mean, at least in India, I still see that there is a 1-to-1 correlation between energy and GDP, right? Because, if we need our GDP to continue to grow, we will need more and more energy to reach all the people. And for that, what do? Yes, we can go with microgrids and we can have renewables, but again, that requires a lot of investment, right? How do you leverage the current investment? So at some stage, we will need financing at a very, very significant scale, right? If countries like the BRIC countries and others have to come to the party and actually stop talking about equity, right, in terms of meeting the carbon budget, but actually getting on to reducing emissions. Because today, if you look at all the COP20, the NAMA agreements, that the numbers that countries have put out in terms of their commitments, even that leads to something like a 2.5 degree from the modeling increase in temperature. On the other hand, very few people are actually acting on it, or very few countries are acting on their own commitments, right? So from every COP meeting to the next COP meeting, the targets get more aspirational, but the actions are even further behind. So the gap intensifies, if anything, right? So I'm not, at times you feel a little bit pessimistic whether and how this is going to happen, or whether adaptation will be the only option left for us to deal with. But the cost of adaptation is going to be even higher, right? Both in terms of human misery, and as we are seeing, with the floods and other things, and we've seen with the bushfires in Australia, it's been absolutely miserable. I mean, the weather patterns here have changed like, for the people who've lived here for 50 years, that they have never seen that before. So it's happening worldwide. Some are better equipped to deal with it and thus are not acting fast enough, and the others have no choice. So they are having to live with it, as we are seeing in Bangladesh and other parts where the floods are coming. So I hope that the leadership of the different countries start to put money together and allow all of these sort of actions to be undertaken, because without serious action, I think we're going to be even further behind the 8 ball.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much. And now moving across to Sutapa.
Hi, Sandeep, and it's really nice to see someone working in this Braveheart area of CCS, actually in implementation and consulting. My question to you is, any young, we need a lot of manpower in this area, young graduates who are coming for clean tech, as a career. Do you think with carbon management being fluctuating over the years based on protocols, do you think a career can be built in that area where students actually go ahead and opt for sequestration and advanced form, or understanding of processes like your career has been, and then moving into something like finding solutions in clean tech in the area that you're talking as far as CCS is concerned?
I think that's a very, very, very good question, Sutapa, and it's actually a loaded question. Because when you start looking at an industry which is by definition a transition industry, right? The question is, how long is that piece of string? Right? So for somebody young who's coming in, if he's looking or she's looking at a 40-year career, is that transition going to last 40 years or not? I personally think so. I don't think we're going to be. People have forecast. We will see peak oil demand by 2025. 2025 is in 2 years, and we're still trying to, and the demand for petroleum fuels is still growing. So these projections are, I think, more aspirational and wishful. So I personally think, yes, there's a lot of opportunity still in this field, whether it's the oil and gas industry or the carbon management industry. On the other hand, a lot of young people are not enamored by this now. They want to go in more in the green side of things. They want to be more part of the renewable energy debate. And I think that's fair enough as well, because you need an enormous amount of effort to try and scale up renewables if those renewables have to actually take over, right? And at the end of this transition phase, replace what the oil and gas industry has been doing for the last 100 years. Yeah. So I think the people are in a very good position, the young people. They can choose either line, and I think they won't be disappointed in terms of where their career takes them, right? I think it'll be fine. I would just like to add that I hope at some stage nuclear comes back into the debate, because if you start looking at dispatchable power in particular, clean dispatchable power, then nuclear with all the improvements in the industry, hopefully will again come back into the debate, because it's been taboo in a lot of places. And unfortunately, I think it should, and it probably deserves a debate or a fresh debate as to whether that is required to try and get carbon management even more effective.
Absolutely fabulous. This was such a rich discussion. So a big thank you and a big round of applause for Tilochan for introducing, for Sandeep for his perspectives, and our leaders panel for the interesting questions and observations. And just as an aside, Suman Sinha is in Australia in about a week's time. I will be catching up with him, and I'm also trying to see if I can organize, a thought leadership event. But more on that later on. Let's move across to.
Yeah, thank you very much, Pradeep. Yeah.
Fabulous. And let's now move across to our third speaker of the day, who is again, has moved from what I call as the field of making money into the field of helping people. This gentleman is Saurabh Singal, who, like most IITians, you see, what we did today, not by design but by accident, we had, three speakers from three separate decades. Richa was 2009. Sandeep was 1981. So I had to find somebody from 1990s. So who else? So Saurabh is 1991 graduate, and after doing his masters went on to do the VC, derivatives trading and all that. And I've still got to ask him that how much money did he make over there. But at the moment he is into what? And for his introduction, I am delighted to welcome Siddharth Jain from Boston. Siddharth was the one who introduced me to Saurabh. Of course, I know Saurabh's sister, who's also an IIT Delhi girl and also been, one of the women in fashion tech. But over to you, Siddharth.
Thank you, Pradeep. Hopefully everyone can hear me fine. And by the way, I want to add that Anupama had spoken in this forum a few months ago. And I'm sure many of you may remember her presentation. So today it's my honor to introduce Saurabh Singal. I've known Saurabh, I fondly call him as Saurabh Bhaiya, from my childhood days, way before I went to IIT. In some ways, we both are products of the same tree, and that's why we have a very strong connection that goes back to my childhood. He was one of the inspirations for me to pursue IIT and specifically going to IIT Delhi, and that makes this introduction for me even more personal and special. So as you mentioned, Pradeep, Saurabh did his computer science and engineering undergrad from IIT Delhi, class of 91, batch of 87. And since then, his career has been highly successful, very interesting, that has spanned 4 countries, US, Singapore, Japan, and India, and different areas, different fields that are so far apart that usually people wouldn't even dare to put them together. Like you said, finance and healthcare. And both fields in some ways are transformative in their own times. I'm pretty sure that everyone is going to be as amazed and as impressed as I have always been with Saurabh. So with that, I will hand it over to Saurabh and let him share his journey rather than me keep talking more about him.
Thank you so much, Siddharth. Such a lovely introduction. Saurabh, will the real Saurabh please stand up? How are you, my friend? And tell me, after 1991, what happened to you?
So after 91, and that was because I was all the things which one should not be. I was very lazy. I was very greedy. I wanted to make most amount of money I could in the shortest amount of time with the least amount of effort. And IIT system being what it is, you will recall the final semester, you don't have much courses. In fact, most of us do no credits except the BTech project. And it was a similar situation for me. So I did only one elective, that was in biotech. That was the time when biotech had just been introduced. And I hold a record that is being the first computer science undergrad to take a biotech elective in IIT Delhi. That will stay with me forever because it's a first. So anyway, the rest of the semester was filled with watching movies and playing games. And one of the movies I watched that year was Pretty Woman. Now, those of that vintage, those of my era who've seen that movie will recall that Richard Gere and Julia Roberts are talking about how Richard doesn't make anything. He just buys companies and splits them and then makes money by structuring transactions. So I thought that this is a good game. It seems you have to analyze things. You don't really have to make anything. You simply break a few things or you put them together. So I resolved that this is where I want to be. Let me look for a job in a bank. Luckily, being from the computer science stream, it was not very difficult. They always needed cyber coolies in all the Western banks all over the world. So a few months later, I found myself working for Citibank. And there, the first thing I was asked was, do you know COBOL? And I was stumped because I was thinking I'll go in there and tell them, there's this new powerful language called C, and there's Unix, and they were running COBOL on AS400 old mini and mainframe systems. So I looked quite stumped, and then they relegated me to running some SQL queries on the treasury desk. But luckily, all was not lost. They hired a new consultant to modernize their systems. So we had these Sun workstations arriving in boxes. And other than him, nobody in Citibank in Japan knew what to do with them. So I was standing there facing those boxes, looking very longingly at them, that how would I love to get my hands on one of them. And he saw me and he said, do you know Unix? And that was the start of something meaningful. So I started working for him. I changed the role. And then once I was helping the derivatives desk compute their P&L, and a textbook on derivatives fell from the hands of the trader under the floor. And I picked it up, and it opened by chance, or maybe because he was reading it, on the page which had the Black-Scholes equation. So I said, well, this looks like the heat equation. And these guys were a little bit shocked. They didn't really expect me to know this. They thought I was just there to plug in their computers and calculate the P&L. So that is how it started. I joined the derivative structuring desk at Merrill Lynch. We did have some good times, but it was very hard work. You had to spend a lot of time, very long hours, sometimes stay up till 4 a.m. And I thought that, as I told you, I was very lazy. I still am very lazy. So I thought, whenever I wanted to excuse my laziness, I would bring my mind to a famous quotation by Richard Hamming, the very great engineer, who had said that machines should work and humans should think. So I entered the world of algorithmic trading, where we could trade across the globe at all times during our sleep. The only caveat was that your computer systems had to be very smart, and they had to be very fast, and of course, fault tolerant. So you would not be awake to know if there is a large move against the positions and you need to do something. The systems have to figure this out themselves. So because I had to do that, I got more and more interested in algorithmic trading, and that was the start. That was actually the end of this journey, because in 2008, inspired by the Lehman Brothers collapse, I was running my own hedge fund in Singapore. And at that time, because of the crisis, you could hire very good candidates. It was, in fact, a very strong team I had. I had one guy who was All India JE rank 16 and IIM Ahmedabad graduate. One person who was the topper of National University of Singapore. My intern was the topper of Singapore Management University, and he was on their water polo team, national team. So we had this kind of talent, and we advertised for one more position. We got 200 CVs, and we had multiple very difficult rounds of interviews and coding tests. Finally, we took one person who was not the best on any dimension, but he was very, very close to the best in almost everything. And he was so humble. His father was a taxi driver, and his mother works as a seamstress. And he told me that he did not want to study further, even though he could, because he wanted to help them retire now. So this boy joined me, and our judgment was sound. He was an amazing programmer. And anything I would give him, he would come back in half the time that I thought he would take. But one day he handed me his resignation. And I said, well, what's wrong? I'm giving you more money than you asked. I always praise you in front of everyone. and I treat you very warmly. Why do you want to leave? So he says, you come into the office at 7:30, you sit there till 3:30, you watch numbers jump up and down the screen. You don't say a word during that time. You don't move. Next morning, when I compute your P&L, there is more dollars in the bank. But this doesn't make me happy. What are you doing for mankind? How is this socially relevant? And until that time, I had not really given it much thought. How is this socially relevant? I had never had any kind of midlife, quarter-life crisis. I'm doing an intellectually challenging job. I'm well paid for it. I'm making money now. What is there to think about? But this was the kind of a turning point. And I started thinking, well, this is a 21-year-old kid, and he's got more thinking, more thought than I have at this ripe old age of 41. So I thought that I should now phase out. Anyway, I was becoming very old to continue that kind of lifestyle. So I thought, what else is it that I can do well? The answer was, I'm okay at computing. I know a little bit of maths. I've always had an interest in biology. So I started an AI company in Singapore. And our first client was a very large Japanese pharmaceutical company. And we did some algorithmic tests for them for drug efficacy testing. And then later, for personal reasons, I decided to also come back to India and start another company here. So this is what we do. This is how it started. I hope that answers your question.
So my next question is that all those books behind you, have you read them?
No. They're just for show.
Okay. So tell me, what are you doing now?
So now we have a collaboration with IIT Delhi, amongst other things. And we are applying artificial intelligence to designing new antibodies. The first thing, the immediate target is a molecule called alpha-synuclein. So this is a molecule found in large quantities in the brain. It's involved in nerve signaling. And sometimes what happens is that more than one molecule of synuclein come together and aggregate. They form clusters. And these are not soluble. And once a cluster starts to form, you can imagine it grows larger and larger. It attracts more and more of these molecules. And these will not only coalesce within the brain, but also in other parts of the body, in other organs. And it leads to Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. So what we are working on is either find an antibody or design a new antibody which is not found in nature, which will bind to this molecule and prevent it from aggregating, possibly even reverse some of the aggregation. So this is what we are doing. If you want me to talk a little bit more about how this works, I can do that, but I don't know how
No,
you
what I'm more keen to understand is that, you are talking of hardcore molecular biology and health. Now, where is, trading and where is this? So what, you just switch careers just like that?
Yes, there is no relationship to this with trading itself as the application, but it's not trading that I was able to do because I knew finance. I was able to do that because of my background in computer science and mathematics, which I studied at Carnegie Mellon. And computing algorithms that we use, for instance, in language modeling. I mentioned to you, we built an English to Hindi machine translation software, which is better than any other machine translation software you can find. So there you treat words as points in a space. Each word is given a position in a space, and words which are similar in meaning, they are positioned close to each other. Words which don't have a relationship to each other are placed far apart. So similar, these are called vectors. I mean, we are at an IIT alumni forum. I don't need to describe what's a vector. So these are multidimensional vectors. Likewise, you can treat molecules as graphs and then convert these graphs into vectors. So each atom is a node in a graph, and each bond can be thought of as the edges of the graph. And then you will replace these graphs by points in a space. So to take simple examples, methanol and ethanol, hopefully, if your modeling is good, they will share positions closer to each other than to something which is completely different in character. And
So
the basic premise,
in other words, it is all about the modeling and the algorithms.
It is, but you cannot do that effectively without understanding the domain itself.
That is where I was coming to, because if you know, I'm sure that you must be aware of that IBM sold off their health Watson division recently for $1 billion. And the reason for selling that was they said that we do not have domain knowledge. So herein comes the issue that you are doing some absolutely fabulous work. But when I look at it, it sounds like, some amount of basic research. So where is the domain expertise coming from and where is the funding coming from?
So the domain expertise comes from IT Delhi. We have a collaboration with the chemical engineering department with the lab of Dr. Gaurav Goyal. And he and his PhD students are bringing in most of the knowledge about proteins and antibodies. Actually, within my company, we also have some expertise, not as much as them, but we have one researcher who's pursuing a PhD in Eindhoven, who works for us as a consultant. We have another gentleman with a chemistry PhD from Harvard and postdoc from Yale. He also consults for us. So we have chemists, we have computer scientists within my company. And we have, of course, this collaboration with IT. So it's a meeting of the mind. I know I will not have.
No, but this is absolutely fabulous, because what you have done is effectively you have used, your ability to not only collaborate with IIT Delhi, which can be challenging task by itself, but also attract some, good brains in the domain knowledge. And which gets me to the next question, then in how many different ways are you collaborating or working with IIT Delhi? I know that you've got an annual conference also, which you do along with IIT Delhi. Now you're also collaborating with them, and you're using the capital manpower or the brain power, for joint work. Is it easy or difficult to collaborate with IIT Delhi?
It depends. Bureaucratic engagements or contracting is always, whether it is IIT Delhi or any other institution in the world, which is semi-governmental in nature, it will always take time, and it does take time. So whichever collaborations we've had with IIT Delhi, this is not the only collaboration we've had. We also have a collaboration with the School of AI. The director, Professor Mossam,
yes,
is also a well-known figure, good personal friend because of the music connection. Yes. And he's also a consultant for our company. So all those things do take significant amount of energy and time. But otherwise, it's a pleasure because you have superior minds coming in, telling us what we don't know, and we learn from them. And the few little things that we know about computing, we share.
So on another, front altogether, with all this technical or technology or emerging tech involvement, on the other hand, you've got a lot of interest in art and culture. Can you throw some light on that?
Yes, I have deep interest in classical music. I really think it could lead to world peace if more people led to practice classical music. I have good interest in chess. I am very fond of bird watching and bird photography. I am fond of languages. before the internet became popular, before you had the World Wide Web, in the early 90s, just after I finished graduation, I used to bring out a magazine called Japan Bharti. I used to live in Japan, and this was a print magazine which had articles from noted authors in several Indian languages and in Japanese. That's why the name Japan Bharti. So we had to purchase the fonts from CDAC. And when we asked them to send us the fonts, we said, let's order all the fonts, all the 11 different scripts that were available. So they thought we are some either NBT or some other governmental agency who's translating books. And it was very difficult because they kept asking us for some internal government codes where we could get discounts. And they were then very amazed that the order is actually from Japan. And we had spent long nights typing those articles in scripts that we did not really know. So that was a fun thing to do.
Fabulous. Now it's over to Ashok. Ashok, over to you.
Yeah. Well, Saurabh, it's been a delight hearing your experiences, and quite amazing because also we've been told that algorithms probably originated in India. There's a dispute between India and Iran, but certainly not in the West. So it's a delight to know how you're using these algorithms. But let me ask you a question, which is, once COVID started and spread across India, we had a situation where even those of us who were fortunate enough not to be infected with it had to go completely online. And everything had to be dependent on your algorithms for them to be able to predict. Now, if I start buying something from Amazon or any other organization, your algorithms tell them what I should want to like to buy in the future, which is quite frightening. But if you bring in algorithms in such a big way in medicine, do you foresee a situation where the personal contact between the doctor and the patient is lost, and everything becomes a machine? Yes, of course, the machine may do a better job than the doctor, but I have not met a very caring machine, perhaps. So you could perhaps enlighten me on this.
So I feel that in the foreseeable future, machines and algorithms will improve. Diagnostics is a very big area where, starting from image analysis as well as very large amounts of data, machines are proving very effective. I'll give you one example. There is something called rare disease. So rare disease, you may guess what it means, but there is a technical definition that it should impact less than a certain number of people in the world, and so on and so forth. So there's a very technical description. There are about 7,000 of these rare diseases all told that we know about. Now, because they are rare, most physicians would not have been exposed to patients who've had exposure to such a disease. So each time somebody with a rare disease goes to see a physician, there is a very high chance that the diagnosis will not catch his condition. So typically it takes between 2 to 3 misdiagnoses before the correct one is found. And because most of these rare diseases are genetic in origin, a lot of times the patient catches them at a relatively younger age, as opposed to, something like a diabetes, which is typically not at a very, very early age most of the time. So there is a longer lifespan fraction that patient has to suffer. And these constitute, even though they are rare individually, if we look at what fraction of the population suffers from one or the other of these 7,000 diseases, that is more than the number of patients of HIV or diabetes. That's a very large number. So how will you eliminate this problem or alleviate this problem where a doctor has never seen this disease, yet he's expected to know everything about 7,000 of these? So there are tools where machines will help. There are other things which you said. I strongly believe that a lot of conditions are cured by the body itself. So when you mentioned this caring, this is actually a very important thing. For simple things, it may be possible that the body cures itself without need for medical or chemical intervention. I'm not saying that there is some mumbo jumbo and you should only do yoga and cure everything. That is non-scientific. That will not happen. But sharing this caring attitude of a physician, a good listening manner, sometimes a scolding tone as may be required, that so far machines don't do. Will they do it in future? We don't know. They might. In the immediate future, it is highly improbable. So that's what I'm trying to say, that machines are here to stay. Algorithms definitely make diagnosis more effective. Algorithms make drug discovery far more effective nowadays. But if you think they're going to replace, that's a very strong binary word. There, I'll have to say, probably not, at least not in yours and my life.
Foreseeable future.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry to put a corollary to your point. If you will pardon me for a minute, Pradeep.
Yeah.
You know, I've been doing some work, research, and I mean, reading up on things like psychedelics, marijuana, and so on, and in the field of mushrooms. Now, in the case of marijuana and cannabis, as it were, the cannabis plant, both the low THC and high THC cannabis, you have a situation where you have 4,500 varieties, and many of these are actually able to cure diseases, they say, even including things like cancer. But the problem is that with 4,500 varieties and 7 billion patients, if you have to do a match, not every variety matches for the disease which the individual patient may be able to get cured by. So this is true about marijuana. This is also true about mushrooms, that you have such 40,000 species of mushrooms or 20,000 species of mushrooms, and then you need to match the mushroom with the disease and the patient. Do you see a situation where your algorithms could do some work in this? Because if it does, you will have a true revolution, in my view, in medicine.
Okay, I will keep that in mind, and we will work on that if we can. But it is true what you're saying. Mushrooms are such a varied, this word mushroom captures a lot of plants and species. In fact, in computer vision, there is a standard data set called the mushroom data set, which has images of various kinds of mushrooms. And some of them are very similar, as often happens in nature. Two species can be very similar and we may not be able to distinguish. And many of them don't even look like mushrooms. For instance, there are so many types of mushrooms which you must have studied where they look nothing like the typical mushroom that we are used to seeing. So even, for example, just to say which mushroom is which is not easy for a human being, given that there are so many of them. And then we are trying to find out, based on your body, which chemicals in which species will cure which condition. That is a very, very difficult task for a human to do. It's also very difficult for a machine to do, but perhaps machine will have some success.
Thank you.
Fabulous. Now over to Sutapa.
Such a fascinating work. My question is, extending what Ashok ji said. When you talk of, some of the articles and experts are talking about the zoonotic diseases and the spread. So is there, how confident are you about the predictive tools for better response as a world?
Can you repeat the question, please?
I said there are a lot of, expert opinion on the spread of zoonotic diseases and what kind of, how the confidence is from the AI community as far as predictive tools are concerned as for better response.
I did not understand. What is a zoonotic disease? Can you describe again? I'm not familiar with the term.
No, what we have. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can now, but I lost you for a
So
few.
what you know, the infections passing from one species to another.
I see. Okay. I don't really know. I don't have a specific answer. I have not studied this in any real detail. All I can say, if I had to answer it, I would be giving you a very fluffy and flaky answer saying that as algorithms improve, surely the confidence will increase. But I don't have a good educated answer for you.
Lovely. So, in the interest of time, we will now go across to Alok. Alok.
Hi, Saurabh. Great to listen to you, and especially the kind of transformation that you have made, despite that connection of algorithms and mathematics that you had. I had two things. Since you're working in this sort of medical field, health field, my wife is an oncologist, and that gives me some bit of understanding, although I can't claim to have any sort of much understanding of that area. What I realized when she was sort of here in India working in different. Right now she's in Singapore, but she was working in India. She realized that even in different fields, we have fairly poor health registries, right? And she would give me example of Sweden, where the government administered health registry system was wonderful. It had years of hundreds of years of data and all that intergenerational data. And why I'm talking about it, because you talked about the rare diseases, and where this kind of data coming from intergenerational data coming that becomes so much very important. So, do you plan to work in this area of, putting in place data systems? Because, that would be a huge task, but it should be actually the government should be doing it, because that would really spawn a lot of research and, a lot of sort of, especially in a country like India. The second part I wanted to sort of, talk about, ask you about, how your, the kind of experience that you have had with IIT Delhi. How do you see the industry academia collaboration ecosystem, especially for IITs? Because when I was director for IITs and IITs in Ministry of HRD, we did start some of these research park, and IIT Madras Research Park, I thought, by Professor Junjunwala had really come up really well. Recently, sort of, about 6 months back, I was in IIT Delhi, and on the back side, they have created they have two at Jhajjar and Sonipat, but here, IIT Delhi also, they have created a research park. So, how do you see that IITs do better on that thing? And second thing, the role of health registries and how we can sort of improve upon that as a country.
So you started with the example of Sweden.
Yeah, that's right.
And that is the place where it's all started.
That's right.
So the first clinical trials,
yes,
is a very interesting story. So in the 18th century, coffee and tea, there was a debate in Sweden, actually in all of Europe,
right,
whether one or the other is more dangerous to human health, is one healthy. So King Gustav II, he decided to do what now we feel was the first clinical trial. He caught two twins who were both arrested for some act of thievery. And he made one of the brothers drink tea. The other, he made drink coffee. He appointed court physicians to administer this at regular intervals in measured amounts of tea and coffee and keep daily records. Now, the sad aspect is that this trial was inconclusive because the king died and then the physicians died and these two boys kept going strong and they were later released and no one knows who died first. But it was the first attempt at doing a clinical trial. And then when you talk of health registries, yes, sure. The more data you have, the more you can analyze, the more you can track. There is been, the holy grail of medicine is personalized medicine or precision medicine or genomic medicine. And we worked on that, but right now we are quite far. Where we are currently is personalization by cohort. So as you can guess, the term means they won't give you a molecule and me a different molecule for the same symptoms or a similar condition. But they may be able to say, okay, these are two Indian Banya guys, 50 to 55 years of age and both balding. Let's give them the same medicine, but for somebody much younger of a different gender, etc., they might prescribe a different molecule. So that kind of personalization by cohort is already happening. It is not very prevalent yet. It's still early days, but that is happening. And to be able to do that effectively, you would need to have data. If you don't have data, you don't have regular measurements. Even after they are cured, you still need to have survivor curves and all those Kaplan-Meier statistics, etc. Health registries will obviously help. So if you're engaged in doing that, that is a very noble and valuable service to society. Now, let me turn to your second question, which was how is it to deal with IITs? Or if you want to rephrase it.
Yeah, I mean, how do you see that, industry academia collaborations as far as IITs are concerned is emerging in IITs? I know of IIT Madras Research Park, which has done fairly well. Professor Jhunjhunwala started it. But IIT Delhi, how is it doing and how do you see it going forward?
So see, whenever it comes to interaction between academia and industry, this is very simple. It is about money. Money is what drives economic activity and entrepreneurship. And if young students see the value in starting a company, many of them will do it because they are lazy or misguided, but some of them will succeed. Some of them will succeed because they were very lucky, even though foolish, but some of them will succeed because they had the right idea, they were very bright and they worked hard. So there are many reasons why some will succeed, but one of the key drivers to get them started is monetary incentive. So you've seen IIT Delhi often calls itself the Stanford of India, which is true because you have these Flipkarts and so many other startups coming out of IIT Delhi alumni. And this effort, whether you set up a research park, it is a good initiative. Obviously, I doubt there can be any argument against setting up a research park in an IIT. But when there is brain, when there is need, when there is economics driving the whole thing, it will happen with or without the research park. For instance, Vinod Khosla, in that era, there was no research park. Actually, even now, even in my times and maybe some younger times, there wasn't any organized. You did have a career cell or career counseling cell, which arranged summer training, as it was called. There was internship was a word I did not know at that time. It was just called summer training. They arranged summer trainings and they arranged interviews in the final year. But still, entrepreneurship grows. It's a function of time, opportunity, place. So by all means, we should encourage as many research parks, not just in IITs, but in other colleges, even if they are not there.
So in other words, Alok, Saurabh has answered your question and yet not answered your question. But that's okay. He's got a lot of dealings with IIT Delhi. And purely in the interest of time, I have to close the session now. This has been absolutely wonderful with such a wide range of people, wide range of, topics that we have talked about, wide range of perspectives that we had. So a big thank you to Richa, to Sandeep, to Saurabh, to Sutapa, to Alok, to Ashok, as well as to Tilochan, Raghu, and Sid. Folks, with this, have a wonderful morning tea or coffee. We still won't know which is going to kill you. Have a lovely afternoon lassi. Have a lovely evening glass of wine. This is Pradeep signing off. And till the next GCC session, where we'll have yet more interesting people and yet more interesting themes to discuss. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.